All right. Last week we covered up through verse 7 of Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Solomon has been considering the state of those who have the proper perspective on life, remembering that life, in addition to the brevity of life being short, also the pursuit or the attitude, the mindset of what the goal is in life also has certainly an important aspect to that. That's why verse 2, it is the end of all men, the living will take it to heart. Not just that life is short, but that life should be lived for a purpose. And of course that purpose is fearing God and keeping His commandments. So in verse 5, this is something of a segue between what he's considering in regard to death earlier in chapter 7 and starting in verse 7. He's going to start dealing with, I don't want to say politics so much as the mindset of the political realm under the sun. And then he's going to get into wealth and wisdom and all that stuff. So in verse 5, it is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. The idea of thorns, which, obviously are worthless. You throw them out. But in addition to that, they're not just neutral either. Thorns are aggressive. Thorns tend to be a bad thing. All right, they hurt. And this is carrying the imagery that Solomon wants with regard to the man hearing the song of fools, for like the crackling of thorns under a pot. It's these things are dangerous, and so you throw them out and you set them on fire. That's vanity. The idea of listening to the song of fools is vanity. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of a fool. And that just goes to show the lack of value that there is in listening to the song of fools and the need to dismiss the song of fools. Listen to those who are wise. They have better advice, they have better counsel than listening to what you just want to hear. Doug?
Maybe another angle to look at verse 6, the crackling of thorns. I think of the sound of thorns burning. It pops, it may be crackling. But as the rest of the verse says, so is laughter of fools. It's so short-lived.
Oh.
The crackling and the burning of thorns, it lasts hot real fast, but it doesn't last. So is the laughter of fools. It's fun for a second, but it doesn't last.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. So in addition to the substance, or lack thereof, right, there's also the amount of time that it has any value. It may seem valuable in the short term, but in the long term, yeah.
That crackling, that popping, it sounds loud. It sounds like it's good.
Get your attention.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought about that. All right, anything else through verse 6?
Followed up in the context he set from the beginning of this chapter, as far as that was referencing the time frame. This laughter is, makes you feel happy, joyous now, but in view of eternity, that doesn't have value. Versus he's talking about going to the house of
mirth versus house of fools. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the house of mourning versus the house of feasting or the house of mirth. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Anything else through verse 6? Verse 7, surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. Verse 7, I really like the American Standard Version of translation of this, and I'm paraphrasing it, but surely extortion destroys a wise man's wisdom, or a man's wisdom, and a bribe debases the heart. That term oppression, it means injury or extortion. That's the concept that is being carried in verse 7. The idea of surely extortion destroys a wise man's reason or the wisdom of a man. It goes to show that no matter how wise one can be, especially in a setting of passing some sort of judgment, Okay, and this is not necessarily just a political type of situation, but in any scenario in which one has authority, that can apply to spiritual matters as well as physical matters. How does extortion destroy a person's reasoning or wisdom? How does extortion do that? We trust those who sit in judgment over man's law, right? We trust them to judge fairly and appropriately according to the law. But what happens if you find out that this judge or that judge was guilty of extortion, okay, or being extorted for that matter, in some effort to sway their decision to do this or to do that or to rule in this way, there was extortion involved?
You would say he can't be bought and trust is gone.
Yeah. So what value is any supposed wisdom that man may have in his rulings if you can't trust it? And it is to that I think Solomon's pointing, and that surely oppression or extortion destroys a wise man's reason. If you can be bought, if you have a price, instead of holding fast to your morals, to your understanding of the law, for instance, there is a price that can be paid that destroys that wisdom. A bribe debases the heart. That which wisdom it nurtures, a bribe destroys that. Not only from the perspective of yourself, but how others see you. This idea, and in particular, the first part destroys a wise man's reason or a man's wisdom. I can see that being from everybody else's perspective. We can't trust you now. We can't be sure that you're being fair when we know that you've taken bribes or that you've been extorted. A bribe, this speaks to the individual character, debases the heart. If you have a price, then you really have no foundation to stand on. There's nothing secure in your beliefs, whether it is your interpretation of the law, whatever. A bribe debases the heart. You know, there's that saying that every man has his price. Okay, and a lot of TV shows, a lot of movies, they kind of build on that whether or not that's true. Okay, generally heroes and heroines, they tend to be incorruptible. Okay, no matter what the price may be that they're being offered, they are not corrupted. And of course, the bad guys, even sometimes when they start out as maybe a good guy, they're the people that are corrupted by some price. And I think that verse 7 certainly has application with regard, because, I mean, obviously wisdom is a key component here. This goes all the way back to verse 1. The wisdom of seeing life for what it is. So, can a bribe, is it really worth it? Taking a bribe, is it worth it to lose all that wisdom can build? And not only for yourself, but for those who see you? If you have a price, and let's take this out of the realm of authority or political situations, but even in the realm of standing up for our own principles. Okay? If there's something that gets us to forsake our principles, especially when we're among friends or coworkers, people who know that in the past we've stood for what we believed in, walked the talk, so to speak, but all of a sudden something new comes along and we yield to that. Okay? Can that individual or those friends or those coworkers, can they count on us to ever stand for our principles again? Unless it's the right price. So it has a lot of different aspects in terms of its association with the wise going to the house of mourning, understanding what life is really about. Not just its length or lack thereof, but also the substance of life. Anything through verse 7? All right. Verse 8. And verse 8 is, I've heard verse 8 quoted often, and it certainly has its own principle. But I think there is this context between the earlier verses of chapter 7 and here these latter verses of chapter 7 as well. The end of a thing is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Verse 9, do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. And of course, verse 10 is also a part of this as well. But the idea here, it carries off of verse 7 from the political, and even from beyond that, from an under-the-sun perspective, as we perceive matters under the sun. Can even good people be bought at times in this world? It happens. It happens. We see it. The end of a thing is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. So in what way does verse 8 not only apply to verse 7, but also apply, like verse 10, do not say, why were the former days better than these? For you do not inquire wisely concerning this. What is Solomon, as Solomon observes this, what does verse 8 have to do with substance of life, length of life, the ability for some people who generally, or at least from outward perspective, you can see that they stand for something, but you find out maybe they are corruptible, they can be bought. What does verse 8 have to do with that? Yes, ma'am.
Well, when you're learning something, you're not as good at it as when you finish.
Okay.
You know, so sometimes the beginning is rough.
Okay.
You know, and I mean, I hope I'm a better Christian today than I was when I was 12.
Sure.
You know, and I think as far as are you talking about the latter part as well, or just
Yeah.
the first part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think verse 8, part A and part B go hand in hand.
Yeah. I think we've all had moments, even if we were just kids, that we're too proud to admit something, and we end up being wrong. You know.
Yeah.
So to be patient and let things play out is easier than us to say what I want or what I think is right. It's more important
Okay.
than anything else.
It seems like the principle Solomon's applying here, the unspoken word is wisdom, isn't it, in verse 8? He's dealt with wisdom, and verse 8 seems to almost be an application of wisdom, doesn't it? Because the end of a thing is better than its beginning. So what do the wise do? They learn and they wait. They learn, they wait, they get all the facts. The end of a thing is better than its beginning. Because you can jump to a conclusion in the beginning, but does that mean you're correct? And does that mean that things have all played out as they're going to if you automatically set your course at the very beginning? The wisdom, though, are patient rather than proud, or to that extent, even immediately indignant over a perceived issue that may not in fact be the case. And that's kind of where I see verse 7 kind of applying here in verse 8, is that the end of a thing is better than its beginning, despite the fact that there are those who can be bought, despite the fact that there are those who don't yield to the principles of the substance of life that they should. The end of a thing is better than its beginning. Be patient. Let things work themselves out. Verse 9, do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. So notice this contrast of the wisdom, verse 8, verses 9. Here's how the fool reacts. First of all, they're proud in spirit. They tend to jump on at the beginning of something and make assumptions rather than seeing it through and finding out all the facts. And the anger rests in the bosom of fools. What is it that anger may cause the fool to do? Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. So what does anger make you do? Sorry? Foolish things. Foolish, huh? To react. And it causes one to basically to give up their emotional control, as opposed to letting everything sink in, giving everything time to sort itself out, giving yourself time to sort things out. People who are angry tend to react without thinking. And this is certainly part of, even in the New Testament, to the Ephesians, Paul said, be angry but sin not. Okay, sometimes we're going to get angry, but don't let that anger cause you to react in such a way as you lose perspective on the bigger picture. And certainly in the midst of other people and how you react to things. It says a lot about your character. Lisa, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I think the song that we sing, Angry Words, is it really sums up what anger can do.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's great. It's a great hymn to sing to remind us of being careful what we say and how we say it. So when Solomon says in verse 10, do not say, why were the former days better than these? Why not? You do not inquire wisely concerning this. Verse 11, and really at the end of chapter 7, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But the idea here of verse 10, how often do we find ourselves saying, 50 years ago, this wasn't the case? You know, even 100 years ago, things were like this. And while society has changed, we can observe those things. When it comes to the behavior of man, has that changed? Has man always been bribable? Yeah, he has. Has man always really sought to go to the house of mirth as opposed to the house of mourning? Yeah, he has. Has man always or had a tendency to kind of jump on a bandwagon at the very beginning of something, draw a conclusion immediately, and then stick to it no matter what? In many ways, we see that play out in our current society, aren't we? There's so many aspects to what he's saying. It has so many applications, but it seems as though the specific context in which he's describing this is verse 7, which kind of acts as a hinge point between those who count the substance of life as meaning something beyond just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Okay, the wise, they go to the house of mourning and they remember that our purpose here is to fear God and keep His commandments. As such, we have a certain integrity, verse 7, or at least we are to have a certain integrity. Because this is the danger of what happens if you allow yourself to forget that fearing God and keeping His commandments, that is the only purpose for which we have under the sun. Then all of a sudden we are bribable. We are corruptible. We lose our integrity. And then our reactions to things become extreme. Our reactions are immediate as opposed to letting things play out. Our reactions are such that they're proud, verse 8. They're angry, verse 9. They're, verse 10, when he says, why were the former days better than these? Solomon doesn't necessarily just say, keep in mind that the former days were no different. He doesn't just say that. He says, for you do not inquire wisely concerning this. Why does he say that? Why doesn't he say, why were the former days better than these? The former days were just exactly like these. Although, certainly, we know that that's an implied point. He's made that case before. Why does he say, you do not inquire wisely concerning this? Why does he say that? Yes, ma'am.
Spend your time living in the past.
Yeah.
Wishing for things that are gone.
And in many ways, and I'm guilty of this, our movies, our TV shows are guilty of this, our books that we read, do people tend to romanticize the past? Okay? The good old days. Okay, you watch movies of medieval times, like how cool is that with the knights and the lances and the armor, and they had no toilet paper. They didn't have the basic necessities. They didn't have toilets. Yeah, I mean, this was not a very fun time to live in. Okay, these are the types of scenarios that people tend to look back and they romanticize. Why were the former days better than these? But the fact of the matter is, man doesn't change. When he says, you do not inquire wisely concerning this, the idea of wisdom appears once again. You do not inquire wisely. Why? Because wisdom sees things for what they are, not for what you want them to be. And that is the very definition of the type of person that Solomon has described when they don't fear God and keep His commandments, and their entire substance is here under the sun for what they can gain. They tend to look at things for what they want them to be, just like it's better to hear the end of a thing than its beginning. They jump to a conclusion, then they're proud and they stay fast because that's the way they want it to be. Nolan?
Just throughout this chapter, there's these things kind of set in opposition that on the surface, we would go, oh, this is the better one. But he's saying, no, it's this. The house of mourning is better than the house of feasting. Verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter. That doesn't seem right, but he's telling us it is. Verse 5, better to be rebuked than song and laughter. No way. Just thing after thing that on the surface, or if you hold a crowd, they would say, well, it's this. No, it's this, the one on this side.
Yeah.
And the same here, as far as past and present.
Right.
And really the whole, you ask, why is he saying this at the start of verse 10? He's into that the first phrase of verse 8, because the end is better than the beginning. Right.
And in a lot of ways, it goes contrary to human nature, doesn't it? Because human nature tends to be very physically based. Okay, that's what human nature is. In fact, in many ways, the New Testament, what we're called to be as Christians, everything about it calls for us to overcome our human instincts and control them in order to submit to the will of God. Okay, in many ways, in many aspects of our life, our character, we're called to counteract or go against what our natural physical instinct would be. And I think in a lot of ways the reason why these things they ring true today as much as they did in Solomon's time is because mankind, there's something innate about the human nature of man that never changes. And that is why even today we see how valuable and how applicable these points that he makes are. That all of this is just it's vanity in people who put their trust and their hopes in the physical under the sun. This is the type of life that they live. First, Lisa.
As far as the physical part, I think there's probably no one in this room with the exception of maybe Sierra that doesn't, and Savannah that wouldn't say, oh, I felt so much better at 20. We've all lived long enough that our physical bodies are wearing out. And there's a lot of stuff that comes with aging. So was that beginning better? Yes. But if I turn that coin over and talk about my spiritual life, my beginning wasn't better than it is right now. And my end, I'm looking forward. So from a spiritual standpoint, my end is going to be way better than my beginning because I'm closer to seeing the Lord. But from a physical standpoint, well, I really enjoyed being 12. I didn't have a whole lot of care.
Yeah.
I was taken care of from a physical standpoint. So if we are focused on the physical, we will say that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where most people come from. But if we look at it from our how we are created in the image of God, our end is definitely better than our beginning if we've worked at it.
Right. Nolan?
We remind ourselves week to week perspective when we consider all these writings about life under the sun. And as he's talked in previous chapters and verses, the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. So here we're kind of back to that cycle. End of life versus birth. We have a baby born and we throw showers, rejoice, excited. There's a new child, and that is.
Yeah.
But in his writings, it's the other end of that, where wisdom says things are better because that person doesn't have to face life under the sun, all its troubles anymore.
Right.
He's completed that.
Well, and there's a certain level of knowledge that is gained, and you would hope with that knowledge comes the wisdom of recognizing the value of what truly exists, of what truly is valuable in life. And to that end, when he says there in verse 8, the end of a thing is better than its beginning, the idea that once you're at the end of it and you can look back, and we often say hindsight is 20/20, right? And we have to be careful not to get so caught up in looking at our mistakes and wishing we had done something different, that we don't, as Paul says, forgetting those things that are behind and reaching forward to those things that are ahead. But did Paul ever forget that he considered himself the chief of sinners? Did he ever forget what he did? No. But did he learn from it? Yes. And in many ways, that application exists in verse 8 as well, is at the end of a thing, you can look back and say, okay, here's all the ways I messed up. Here's things I should have done better. Here's areas perhaps I can share my experience, my wisdom with someone else. That's part of what builds wisdom. There's only a certain amount of wisdom that can be taught. There's a whole other level of wisdom that has to be experienced to have meaning to an individual. Yes, ma'am.
Well, and in the end, our appreciation, you don't appreciate the mobility of your body necessarily when you're 18, 19,
Right.
20.
Because you don't know that there's anything else.
Exactly. But as far as the spiritual nature goes, we become more appreciative because of things that have happened, because we've been in the house of mourning,
Yeah.
because of all that we understand, I hope, more deeply the sacrifice that was made on our behalf.
Well,
And
and
appreciate it more.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And when you look back, as all of us have tendency to do, we look back over things and we see God's providence in many ways, in many aspects of our lives. And with that providence comes appreciation for not only what God has done for us in the past, but knowing what He is going to continue to do to be with us in the future. And to that end, that wisdom of being able to look back, to perceive that things weren't what they appeared to be at the beginning. Okay? And therefore, and the lesson learned not to rush to anger, verse 9. Not to be proud in spirit, but to let things play out, especially in areas of which I have no control. Right? And 90% of the things we worry about, it's the stuff we have no control over. And that in particular, being able to let that go, be patient in those issues, be patient in those matters, and let things work themselves out. Okay? And where I have an opportunity to step in and do something or say something that is wise and appropriate, then so be it. Anything else through verse 10? Verse 11. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, as money is a defense. But the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. American Standard here has wisdom is good like an inheritance, and profitable to those who see the sun. Our commentator here, Garrett, ironically, he thinks that the New King James Version, that the translation here is better, that wisdom is good with an inheritance, because he believes that there's a play here on the idea of what wisdom and money can do together, I guess. I ironically prefer the American Standard Version of this, that wisdom is good like an inheritance is good. And of course, the term inheritance here is specifically referring to money inheritance. It is profitable to those who see the sun. Yes, money is profitable to those, again, who see the sun. If you see the sun, where are you? You're under the sun, right? Just like wisdom is profitable, okay? For wisdom is a defense, as money is a defense. How are both means of a defense? What does that mean, that it is a defense?
You can buy the best lawyer.
Okay, okay. So money can buy you a lot of things, can it? It can buy you things, it can buy you power, it can buy you influence, it can buy you surgeries and experimental drugs and all kinds of stuff that can help you in this life, right? But where is money's shortcoming? Well, the temptation to put trust in it, but what is intrinsic to money that is its own weakness, its own downfall? Once you spend it,
It's gone. There's no life in money.
there's no life in money, and you can't count on it to remain, right? There is a sense in which it leaves after a while. But wisdom, hopefully, once I apply or receive wisdom and then I use it, does it run out? Shouldn't, right? Not only should it remain, but it should increase as I use it and as I perceive more and more. These are the direct opposites of one another in the sense of Money tends to dwindle, but wisdom tends to grow, especially if the individual is seeking to grow in wisdom. Wisdom, that's why verse 12 at the end, the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Money can buy you only so much. Wisdom can help you from ever getting into the scenarios that you got yourself into with your money. Lisa.
Money can get you into a trap, and wisdom can keep you out of the trap.
Sure. The idea of a defense, I think, is a means of protection. Okay, is what he's describing here. Money can protect you against only so much. Okay, certainly it's helpful in that matter. But ultimately, between the two, what should we rather have? Again, human instinct goes to the money part, but what should we rather have between the two? Wisdom. And then once you have wisdom, if you happen to have money, then maybe it won't dwindle so quickly as it would with people who don't have the wisdom but do have the money. Okay, but that's why he branches off verse 12 when he says the excellence of knowledge compared to the excellence of money is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Money can't do that. Money just tends to go away. Anything?
It's essentially the give a manifest, teach a manifest.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. And of course, the broader context of this, what we've been dealing with, regarding the end of a thing being better than its beginning, the substance of life, the wisdom that goes into realizing what the substance of life is and the value of it, all of that then leads to verse 11 and 12. Keep in mind, what did he say about those who could be bought, those who could be bribed, especially those in authority whose wisdom is destroyed by extortion? Wisdom is good, like an inheritance or like money. It's profitable to those who see the sun. But wisdom ultimately gets you further. Wisdom gives you life. All right, anything through verse 12?
These verses 11 and 12 are back when he said you didn't inquire wisely about it.
Here's the inquiring. Here's what you should be inquiring. Yeah. Rather than saying, "Hey, look at wasn't things in the past better than they were now?" You don't inquire wisely. You need to be inquiring wisely about things, and this certainly is the part of that. Verse 13. Consider the work of God, for who can make straight what he has made crooked? Solomon's mentioned this going all the way back to chapter 1, in the sense that typically we tend to think of God has made straight what man has made crooked. Okay? And in terms of sin, in terms of character and so forth, that's true. God makes straight what man has made crooked. But that's not what Solomon says here. He says, who can make straight what he has made crooked? What does that mean? Okay. Especially for the OCD of us, okay? If something's slightly off, what is your instinct to do? It got to be straight. I was doing lines for last week's PowerPoint, and I couldn't quite get them even. I had to go into the settings in PowerPoint, and I had to go to the actual 0.238 inches to make it just right so it's even all the way across, because it bothered me. It's not saying that what God has made badly or wrong. That's not what Solomon is describing. What appears to man as crooked, we tend to think, God, we can do this, we can make this better. Let me fix this for you. Kind of like Sarah with her desiring to help God out with that promise of a child. Okay, let me help you out here. Consider the work of God. Well, if God's work, everything that he does is full of glory, full of goodness, and is meant for good for man, then what appears to be crooked needs to be left alone, doesn't it? Even if it goes against human instinct. And I think in a lot of ways, whether you actually are OCD or not, people tend to like to have things in certain order. They don't like it when things are are out of place or messed up, we prefer to have our desk, for those of us who have a neat desk, if somebody goes in there and moves stuff around, even if it's an organized mess, it's like, where'd you put my scissors? They were right here on top of this stack of papers. You have everything the way you want it in your mind. Verse 14. This is where the application comes in. In the day of prosperity, be joyful, but in the day of adversity, consider. Surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, so that man can find out nothing that will come after him. Verse 13, Solomon has a tendency to establish a broad principle full of wisdom, like verse 13. Has many applications. But then he brings a specific application out in verse 14. For example, in the day of prosperity, in the days where we have, and this is specifically physical goods, things that sustain us, luxuries, things we enjoy, be joyful. Enjoy what God has blessed you. But in the day of adversity, or in the day in which you've lost perhaps much of that, consider. What was it that Job, when he was talking to his wife in Job chapter 2, and his wife was bemoaning what God had done and just cursed God and die, what did Job say? Shall we accept good from the Lord, but not accept adversity? This is the same concept. Surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, and for a reason. Nolan, I saw your hand at some point, I thought.
Just along with that, because our vision is this duration in time, God's seeing
Big picture, yeah.
We think we can extrapolate based on our 80 years what's going to be, but we don't know what's going to be.
And we don't know what's really good for us either. No matter how old we may get, and we think we know what's best for us, the things in which God has, quote unquote, made crooked, the ways which we really wish it hadn't gone, or we see things and we wish it wouldn't be going that way, you have no control over it. Let God take care of it, because there's a reason for it. All right, we'll stop there. We'll pick up with verse 13 and 14 next week. Also, in the meantime, I want everybody to be thinking about verse 15, because I know this is the root of a lot of curiosity with people. I'm sorry, not verse 15, verse 16. Do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Verse 17, do not be overly wicked, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? We're going to talk about that. We'll get to that next Wednesday night. So be thinking about that in the next week, and let's see if we can figure out what that means.